Rain tapped gently against the cafe window as Jake sat alone at the corner table, staring at the untouched cup of coffee. He'd checked his watch for the third time in 10 minutes. His date was supposed to arrive half an hour ago. He wasn't angry, just disappointed. After all these years, after all the loneliness, this was supposed to be a fresh start. The waitress gave him a sympathetic smile as she refilled his cup. He nodded politely, pretending it didn't sting. Just when he decided to leave, the bell above the door jingled. 4 little kids, 2 boys and 2 girls, ran in, dripping from the rain, holding a crumpled umbrella. The oldest girl looked around and then walked straight toward him. "Sir?" she said, catching her breath. "Our mommy's really sorry she's late." Jake froze. The entire cafe seemed to quiet down. He blinked, confused. Mommy? Who was their mother? And why were these kids looking for him? The moment would change his life forever. Jake Miller had spent the last 6 years building a life from the ashes. A former Army medic, he'd lost his wife, Emily, to cancer right after returning home from deployment. Left alone with his 8-year-old son, Liam, he'd buried himself in work, convincing himself that love was something for other people, not broken men with too many scars. Tonight was supposed to be different. His best friend and fellow veteran, Sam, had set him up on a blind date. "You've done your duty for everyone else, brother. It's time someone takes care of you," Sam had said. Jake had reluctantly agreed, if only to quiet his friend. He arrived early, as soldiers often do, shaved, clean shirt, nervous but hopeful. The cafe was small, warm, and smelled like cinnamon and coffee. He'd chosen a corner seat watching couples laugh and families share desserts. For the first time in years, he wanted that again, a reason to come home to someone. But minutes turned into an hour. No one came. His phone stayed silent. His heart, though used to silence, still ached with that familiar heaviness. Maybe he was foolish for hoping. Maybe some people weren't meant for second chances. He stood to leave when the door swung open. 4 kids stumbled in, soaked and shivering. The oldest, a girl about 10, walked straight toward him, clutching a damp piece of paper. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly. "Are you Mr. Jake?" He nodded slowly. "Yes." "Who are you?" She looked back at her siblings and said, "Our mommy told us to find you. She said to tell you she's really sorry she's late." Jake blinked, confused. "Your mommy?" Before he could ask more, a woman rushed in, holding her coat around her. Her hair was slightly wet, her cheeks flushed from running. When she saw Jake, she froze, eyes wide, breath catching. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly, ushering the kids toward a booth. "The babysitter canceled last minute, and I didn't want to cancel on you. I'm—" "Grace," Jake interrupted softly, remembering the name Sam had mentioned. She smiled nervously. "That's me. And these," she gestured to the 4 kids, "are my world." Jake didn't know whether to laugh or cry. His empty table had just turned into the most chaotic, heartwarming scene he'd seen in years. Grace apologized again and again, but Jake shook his head. "It's fine," he said gently, watching as the youngest spilled some water and the others giggled. "Honestly, it's more than fine." As the evening went on, the awkwardness melted away. Grace was kind, quick-witted, and genuine. She worked 2 jobs, raised her kids alone, and hadn't been on a date in years either. They talked about struggles, about loss, about the quiet strength it took to keep going. By the end of the night, Jake realized something he hadn't in years. He felt alive again. When Grace gathered her kids to leave, the oldest turned to Jake and said, "Mommy smiled today. She doesn't do that much." Jake's heart twisted softly. Maybe tonight wasn't an accident. Maybe it was fate giving both of them a second chance. Weeks turned into months, and Jake found himself visiting Grace and her kids often. What started as coffee turned into dinners, playground visits, and laughter he hadn't heard in years. Grace's kids adored him. They called him Mr. Jake, and he'd teach them how to fix bikes or tell stories about brave heroes, never mentioning that he had once been one. Liam, his own son, had been hesitant at first, quiet, cautious, worried his dad might love someone else more. But Grace had a warmth that wrapped around everyone. She never tried to replace Emily. She simply became a friend to Liam. The 2 families began blending naturally, like puzzle pieces that were always meant to fit. But every new happiness brings its test. One afternoon, Grace called Jake in tears. Her youngest Ellie had fallen and needed stitches. Jake dropped everything, racing to the hospital. When he arrived, she was holding Ellie's hand, shaking. Jake sat beside her quietly, letting her cry on his shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone," he whispered. She looked at him with tearful eyes. "I've done everything alone for so long, Jake. I don't even know how to lean on someone anymore." He smiled gently. "Then let me remind you how." That night, after Ellie was home safe, Grace found a small box on her porch the next morning. A simple note inside that read, "For the woman who taught me to live again." Inside was a tiny silver charm bracelet with 5 charms, a heart, a soldier's star, and 4 little initials for her kids. She called him Crying Again, but this time, Happy Tears. "Jake, why would you do this?" "Because," he said softly, "you and those kids walked into my life when I'd given up on love. You reminded me that sometimes God sends answers in the most unexpected ways, even 4 small ones with wet shoes and nervous smiles." A few months later, on the anniversary of their first date, Jake brought Grace and the kids back to that same café. The waitress smiled when she saw them. This time, no one was late, no one was lonely. Jake took a deep breath, knelt down beside the table, and held out a small ring. Grace's eyes widened. The kids gasped. Liam grinned from the corner. "Grace," Jake said, his voice shaking, "you and your kids gave me back my life. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I don't want to face it without you. Will you marry me?" She couldn't speak, just nodded through tears. The cafe burst into applause, and as the kids hugged them both, Jake looked at them and whispered, "I guess my blind date wasn't empty after all." Sometimes, life doesn't give us what we expect. It gives us what we need. A broken soldier found a home, and a tired mother found a partner who stayed. Love doesn't always arrive on time, but when it does, it's worth every minute of waiting.